Over the last decade, the UK's immigration health surcharge has changed significantly. But how much of that change was inflation, and how much was real growth? Using official UK Home Office and ONS data, this analysis breaks down the numbers from 2015 to 2026, comparing these immigration costs to wages, inflation, and housing. This is not commentary. This is structured economic measurement.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll cover some key definitions so we're all on the same page. Then, we'll walk through the timeline of the fee increases. After that, we'll compare that growth against inflation and wages, and then look at real-world affordability before we wrap up with the key data-driven takeaways.
Okay, so first things first, let's establish the ground rules. It's really important we understand the terms we're using because it sets the foundation for the rest of this analysis.
So the Immigration Health Surcharge, or IHS, what is it? Well, it's a fee that most people applying for a UK visa for longer than 6 months have to pay. The official purpose is to ensure that migrants contribute to the National Health Service. But it's also worth knowing that government reports have confirmed the fee system generates a pretty big surplus, which is then used to fund other parts of the immigration system. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is this. It has to be paid in full and upfront for the entire length of the visa. Next up is real terms growth. This might sound a bit like jargon, but it's a simple and really important idea. We're measuring the actual increase in cost. We do this by stripping away the effects of general inflation. This lets us see how much more purchasing power something actually requires today compared to in the past. It's the difference between a simple price hike and a genuine increase in the economic weight of a cost. Okay, now that we have those definitions clear, let's jump into the history. This part of our analysis covers what has been a decade of pretty rapid escalation in this surcharge. So the IHS first appeared in April 2015, starting at a rate of £200 a year. Then, less than 4 years later, in January 2019, it doubled to £400. Things kept moving. In October 2020, it jumped again, this time by 56% to £624. And then we have the most recent and largest single cash increase, which came in February 2024, when it rose by another 66% to £1,035 per person per year.
And now we get to the core of our analysis. This is where we take those fee increases we just saw and put them into a wider economic context. We're going to separate the sticker price from the real underlying cost.
So, this is the central question we're tackling. That 417% total increase in the IHS since 2015, it's a huge number on its own, right? But what we need to know is how it stacks up against the growth in what people actually earn and the general rise in the cost of living. Let's start by setting our first benchmark, wages. According to the Office for National Statistics, the median annual salary for a full-time worker in the UK rose from about £27,600 in 2015 to an estimated £39,039 by 2025. So that's a nominal increase of 41%.
Our second benchmark is the Consumer Prices Index, or CPI. You can think of this as the measure for the general increase in the cost of goods and services, basically the overall cost of living. Over that same 10-year stretch, cumulative inflation was approximately 25%. And now, let's bring the IHS back into the picture. That growth from £200 to £1,035 per year represents a total increase of 417%. So let's put these three numbers right next to each other. And when you see it laid out visually like this, the divergence is, well, it's pretty staggering. You've got these relatively modest bars for inflation and wage growth sitting there at around 25% and 41%. And then you have this colossal bar for the IHS growth, soaring up to 417%. It's not just in a different league, it's in a completely different universe. So let's try to translate these abstract percentages into something more tangible. What does this cost actually feel like for a person who's planning to move to and work in the UK? What's the real-world impact? This table is really telling. If you look back at 2015, the annual £200 surcharge took up about 8.7% of a median worker's gross monthly salary. Now, fast forward to 2024, with the surcharge at over £1,000, it now consumes 33.1% of a median gross monthly salary. So it's gone from a notable expense to eating up an entire third of a month's income before tax. And we need to circle back to this crucial rule. It's not a monthly payment. That 1/3 of a month's salary we just talked about gets multiplied by the number of years on the visa.
and that entire massive sum has to be paid in one single transaction before the visa can even be approved.
So let's model a realistic scenario just to see what this looks like. For a single skilled worker applying for a 5-year visa in 2025, their visa application fee alone is over £1,500. Then the IHS is 5 times £1,035, which comes to £5,175. So the total upfront cost is nearly £6,700. Now, when you compare that to the median annual salary, you see the real scale of it. That's over 17% of an entire year's gross pay, needed in cash right at the start. And to put that 17% upfront cost into some context, just think about other major financial pressures. Things like rising rents and house prices are, of course, significant challenges for everyone. But their annual growth is typically in the low single digits. The sheer scale of this one-time visa cost, it's just operating on a completely different level.
Okay, so after walking through all that data, what's the bottom line? Let's quickly summarize the key, purely data-driven takeaways from this analysis. First, the 417% growth of the IHS has just completely dwarfed the growth in both wages and general inflation. Second, the upfront cost for just a single person's 5-year visa now requires a capital outlay of over 17% of the median annual salary. Third, the annual surcharge has ballooned from less than 10% of a month's pay to about a third. And finally, as we touched on earlier, this system is designed to generate a significant surplus, which is then used to help fund other parts of the immigration and border system. All of this leaves us with one final critical question. The data shows a very clear and actually accelerating divergence between the cost to immigrate and the average earnings that are available in the country. So as this gap continues to widen, what is the long-term impact on the UK's ability to compete for and attract global talent? This has been Migration Cost Index, structured, data-driven analysis of migration costs in the United Kingdom. All figures are based on publicly available data and presented without commentary. For continued economic analysis, see the next video in this series.